All right, ladies and gentlemen, hello and welcome back once again to the longest running show in the world about data. It's called DM Radio. Yours truly, Eric Kavanaugh here. Year 17 is underway on DM Radio, and I think we have a fantastic topic to dive right in. Our first event in March. Of course, we started back in '08 in February. So this is our first net new month in year 17, a data bill of rights. We have a Bill of Rights, of course, in this country. It is extremely well known. It's been emulated in other countries to a certain degree, but it's a big deal. And I've met a lot of people and talked to a lot of people, philosophers, government leaders, people on the street. And one guy in particular, he gave a talk on the secret to happiness. My wife brought me to this years ago. And it was an absolutely fascinating presentation, a guy from the Himalayan Institute. And he said it's a one word answer for the secret to happiness. And the answer is compassion. That's what he said. That's the secret to happiness. I thought that was very interesting. And then he started talking about how successful the United States is. And I asked him, well, why? Why do you think the U.S. is so successful? He said, because you have freedom, because you have freedom of speech and freedom of enterprise. And of course, that comes from the Bill of Rights, right? The First Amendment, freedom of speech. So, what about a data Bill of Rights? That's what we're going to talk about today. We've got three wonderful guests lined up for you. We've got Kate Strachnyi from DATAcated, a huge LinkedIn following, and she's just amazing. She's constantly creating excellent content, so we're always happy to have her online. We have our good friend David Linthicum here, who is always doing cool stuff. He has so many courses. He's got a new YouTube channel you should check out. And my good buddy Doug Kimball is here from Ontotext. Big thanks to those folks for helping us bring you this content free of charge. So let me start off with my three principles that I think are really important for a data bill of rights. I call it the AAA standard. Data should be accurate, data should be accessible, and data should be aligned. And that alignment is pretty important stuff. So it can be done with semantic models. It can be done, I don't know, with a knowledge graph, perhaps. How do you align the data that you need? This is something people spend a lot of time on, trying to get the right data in order to either train a model, for example, or feed a model, or just feed some particular system. Data modeling, of course, has been around for a long time. And now AI, this voracious appetite that companies have for I think is going to be a huge driver for data quality, for data governance, for data accessibility. Without those things, you're not going to do a very good job with AI. And we all know garbage in, garbage out in traditional data terms. But in the world of AI, it's propagation of errors. I mean, if you get garbage in, you're going to get just a whole ton of garbage out on the other side, and you won't know when. That's the problem. That's the real challenge with this stuff. I was talking with gentleman Adrian Bowles just yesterday, who's writing some a book about some of this stuff. And he made some really interesting points. He said, you know, you really should go and read the terms and conditions for ChatGPT, because I saw something that came out that I think was some regulation from somewhere saying you cannot use generative AI for anything in terms of healthcare administration for reasons that should be obvious, right? You want to be able to have auditability, accountability on what gets recommended for patients. So there's some regulation. I'll have to look up exactly what it is. But he said, yeah, well, read the terms and conditions of ChatGPT. And they say, do not use this for anything associated with healthcare. They say, don't use it for all kinds of things. They're basically saying, look, just don't even use this, okay? It's just a toy. Just play with it, which is kind of interesting because it is still a bit wonky. And I can't help but think to myself, as I've watched Gemini seemingly degrade in capability, I've talked to a bunch of people about this. I see a lot of stories around this. And I keep thinking about Sam Altman and what he said a couple of months ago when he came out and said, yeah, the era of large language models is over. And I think most people in the world said, huh? Like, this is your baby? What are you talking about? Maybe this is what he was talking about, that the robustness is degrading. And of course, my buddy Usama Fayyad joked. He said, the first thing you should know about these models is they're too big. They're not supposed to work. Like, nobody knows why they work, which is like, that's also not terribly encouraging. But it is to be considered, and AI, I promise, needs clean, governed, quality data, or you're going to be in big trouble. So my three bills in the Bill of Rights for data are, again, to be accurate, to be accessible, and to be aligned. And with that, I'll hand it over to Kate Strachnyi. Tell us a bit about yourself and what you see as critical components of a data Bill of Rights.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for having me here, Eric. Hi, everybody. It's Kate Strachnyi. I'm the founder of DATAcated. It's a company that is focused on helping clients reach their audience on LinkedIn, on other social media platforms like YouTube, with media engagement. So we work with all data, AI, and machine learning clients for that. Now, Eric, when you told me about, hey, do you want to join a panel on the Data Bill of Rights? I immediately said yes because, well, I think it's fun to have these conversations. I like to be part of this. But I also have some ideas on what I think we need as we're getting more data, we're collecting more data, we're using all these apps that are collecting our data, whether we like it or not, or we know it or not. I think there needs to be some sort of Bill of Rights for not only the data itself, like you just described, but also for the people that it is impacting, right? So I want to talk about things like data privacy. So, for example, if people go on a social media platform and check into a hotel or check into a restaurant, we want to make sure that those consumers have a right to be forgotten, to have that data be private, to have that data not be sold to everybody who wants to buy it. And right now, I think similar to your comment on Gen AI sort of telling us, do not use this, this is a toy, we're still all using it. I use Gen AI. I'm sure everyone else here is using it. We know it might not be 100% accurate, but we're going to use it. And I think similarly with all the apps that are collecting our data, sometimes location data, sometimes really precise location data, which is scary. We generally opt in because we are not given a choice. So I think that's the other Bill of Rights that I'm hoping for, is being able to actually opt out without having to opt out of using the apps completely, where we say, no, you cannot use my data and I can still download the app. Right now, that's simply not the case. The other area, I think, especially when it comes to AI and all the advancements we're making, we're being a lot more efficient, right? Let's say if we go to a bank, we try to get a loan, there is some sort of algorithm on the back end that says, Eric, you get a loan. Doug, you don't get a loan. Sorry, Doug, I had to pick on you. So we need to be able to know, why did that decision take place? We need to be told as consumers that this decision was made with the maybe assistance of a machine learning model or some sort of algorithm, and be transparent as to the factors that are actually included in that model. I think we need to get away from companies saying that this is too complicated for you. There's a black box. We don't understand the black box. You don't understand it. Nobody gets it. It spits out a decision. It's always right. I think we need to move away from that. And part of that Bill of Rights that I'm hoping to see in the world, not just the United States, but globally, is to have that transparency. You can break it down. You can say the factors we're looking at are mainly these 5 factors that are deciding whether you get a loan or not, or if you get admitted to a college or not. So I'll stop here. I have a lot more thoughts on this, but I'll pass it on to whoever else wanted to contribute here.
Yeah, I'll throw it over to, those are all good ones, by the way. I'll throw it over to David Linthicum. Data Bill of Rights. What are the rights you think are most important?
Mine are very autocratic. I think number one, transparency. Someone should notify me if they're leveraging my data for any reason. And I understand about these agreements that we sign, we don't read. So you have to re-notify me every year or so I know that you're leveraging my data. It may be a benefit to me, but I need to know you're doing that. And obviously, that's something I think most other people would desire as well. And that gets into consent and control. So in other words, it's consensual relationship that I'm pushing my data. In other words, all of the attributes to me, including my medical records and my finance records and my insurance records and all the petabytes of information I'm sure people are gathering about me over the course of a lifetime, I need to be able to consent, know where it is, and have control of it. And I love what was just recommended, the ability to be forgotten at some point in time. I can pull the plug on it and have the data deleted. And in other words, you don't know anything about me anymore, and I'm able to start anew if that's the case. That's my right to do that. And then finally, to enforce this stuff, there needs to be accountability. So people need to be held accountable for the misuse of data. And so laws and organization, and I view this as kind of a role of government, and they do this in some instances, but not all, the ability to find out when the data is being misused, hold these organizations accountable so there's some sort of punitive damages that maybe come to me, or they're paying me money in the case that they're using my data incorrectly. And I think we have to get into this autocratic stance where data is more valuable to us than we think it is. Right now, I think people think data is a commodity. They don't mind sharing it, things like that. And it's going to come back to bite them. And certainly as it's being consumed in massive AI engines, And in many instances, it's going to be used against them, whether that's insurance policies, that's admission into colleges, universities, whether it's a job, the ability to get a job. All that stuff is going to be both an asset and a deficit if it's not managed correctly.
Hmm. And you know, a good buddy of mine, George Lawton, he writes for Diginomica these days. He's written for lots of different publications. He emailed me something yesterday about this topic that I thought was very interesting. He said he's going to write today about what he calls the obscurity tax. And what he means by that is people are nervous about sharing their data these days. And because of that, we don't have a full picture of what's really happening out there in the world because there are these privacy concerns. What are you going to use it for? All this kind of stuff. You call that the obscurity tax. I think that's pretty interesting. It's sort of an opportunity cost that we're facing because there isn't clarity on these issues. And, you know, to be honest, I don't think there will ever be real deep clarity on this stuff because you don't know what you're going to use the data for. But I mean, GDPR comes right out and says that you have to know what you're going to use it for. Why are you collecting it? For what purpose will it be used? Can that purpose change over time? I mean, I think these are all good guidelines, but in terms of enforceability, it gets kind of loosey-goosey. But David, what do you think about that obscurity tax idea?
I think it's a great idea, and I think the ability to look at different kind of value metrics around leveraging these data points and be able to figure how these kind of work into the systems and really become part of the design of these systems and how they leverage and consume data is something we need to consider. And there's always going to be an upside and a downside to leveraging certain types of data. And you're right. I mean, we're not going to get the complete picture of everything that's out there unless people are able to participate in it or forced to participate in it. And so by doing that, we're going to never have kind of a good understanding of the information that we're consuming because we can't understand it holistically. We only can get it bits and pieces of it.
That's a good point. Last but not least, Doug Kimball from Ontotext. What are your thoughts about a data bill of rights? What stands out in your mind?
Yeah, I just want to give some quick background. So when you first asked about an opportunity for a show, the reason I thought of the Data Bill of Rights, and I want to give Michael Atkins credit for some of his work on that. So that spurred some ideas. We're working this graph center of excellence concept, and one of the parts that was the data, the idea of the Data Bill of Rights. And so I wanted to play with that. And like Kate, I like to have, I guess, fun with it when I started looking at it from a marketing perspective. How do we talk about this? One of the things that comes to mind is data liberation. So, I put it in my mind into the Bill of Rights format like we have for in the United States and said, here's what your rights are. But, we have the right to set our data free. We're talking about data privacy a lot, which is very important. All those things I agree with. But we want to make sure we can have the freedom to have that data be interoperable. In other words, I don't want to have my data only being used here. If I'm trying to get true value out of it, going back to the app situation that Kate mentioned, if this app has accessible, access that data source, and parallel together, now I get more value from the data that I've agreed to share. You still have to look at the privacy interconnectedness, but we don't want to have data restraints unless we choose to apply them, of course, in that case. But if you think about it, just the easy example of trying to find directions to your favorite restaurant when you're in a new city, you need to have that data be connected and be liberated for me to get the results that I want. So on the one hand, we want the data privacy, yes, but we really want to have that data be free to help to bring me value as the end user. And that's where having that integration between those different data sources we were talking about the earlier banter becomes so important. So that's just one of the things I think about. But then I also kind of put it as I'm writing this document I want to put out there is the pursuit of, instead of pursuit of happiness, the pursuit of interconnectedness. So connecting the dots of all those different data to get to those hidden potentials we've been talking about so far is we're doing this stuff for business. Our users want to get insights. So again, whether it's me doing it or a business doing it, they want to get to something. So they have the right to have that interconnectedness of data. So that's me. And then, obviously coming from the graph technology side, I think a lot about, connecting things and creating those pathways. But in the end, again, I'm going to keep on picking on what Kate said, because I think it's very important. When I pick up my phone to solve a problem using an app or going on a browser or whatever it is, I really don't ultimately care where that data is coming from. I don't care that it might be going from here to there. I just want to get a decision made. I want to, trust that whatever I'm using is bringing together trusted disparate data to solve a problem. That's the right I have, and that's a right or an expectation that I have as a user, is solve my problems. I don't care where the data is until it comes back to bite me, but that's a different story.
Yeah, that's interesting. And, Kate, I'll throw this one over to you. What about the right to correct bad data? Because I've had people misspell my name countless times. A good friend of mine I gave him a review for his book, and he sent me a copy. And on the first page, it's got my name misspelled. I was like, dude, come on, man. Like I gave him a hard time. He goes, well, that's the upside of on-demand printing is we'll get it fixed for the next one. But what about the right to fix bad data?
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. I think it goes in line with the right to be forgotten. You should have an absolute right to fix your data. I know, what's her name? Albert, I forgot her last name. Merrill, Albert Merrill. I just had her on the DATAcated show. She's an author of a book called Crimes Against Data.
Oh,
And
I like
it's like
that.
101 crimes of very similar to your story just now, Eric, about your name being misspelled. She's had her name misspelled in so many places, and especially with the government and the post office, they can never get her mailing address right. And she, for the life of her, can never get this stuff corrected. So I think we're still very much facing that problem of trying to correct data. And I think that goes back to just the way the systems are not speaking to each other. You maybe email customer service or you email your friend who's got his executive assistant who's like, oh yeah, I'm going to spell the name right next time, but it's already gone out. So it is very difficult to control after the fact, of course. So get your data right the first time, which is the best time at the beginning, get your data quality right. But yeah, absolutely. There should be some sort of process in place to correct that data. And I think more importantly, to just delete that data, because there have been times that people either post something or say something or quote it somewhere where they wish that was no longer showing up, right? If it's something that is working very much against them
Right.
and they have no control over, somebody else said something about them, there should be some sort of protocol or process in place where you can correct it.
Yeah. Well, bad data is everywhere. I think it's a good band name, Bad Data. I'd go see those guys. That would be kind of fun. But bad data is everywhere, and it causes trouble. It causes trouble in the printing press industry and mailing. I remember TDWI did a report on that like 20 odd years ago, and they quantified how much money it actually costs bad data in mailing addresses. And it's a lot of money, and it's a lot of wasted paper, and it's a lot of wasted energy. But folks, don't touch that dial. You're listening to the longest running show in the world about data. It's called DM Radio. We'll be right back. All right, folks, welcome back to DM Radio, talking all things the Data Bill of Rights. We've got Doug Kimball of Ontotext, Kate Strachnyi of DATAcated, and our good buddy David Linthicum, who is a independent consultant, analyst, and author these days. Has tons of courses you can take. Was watching one of your courses the other day. It was really fantastic stuff. And David, I'll throw this over to you. As companies lean more into the world of AI and try to explore AI, I'm looking at this as a real clarion call for data governance, for data discovery, for understanding what you have. Because I think until recently, yeah, there was so much unstructured data, which was relatively unusable, at least at any significant scale. And I think those days are now ending. Data, all this unstructured data in large enterprises, which is like 80% of it, it's in PDFs, it's in emails, it's in phone calls, it's in all these different formats, all of which can now be scanned, turned into text, turned into vectors, turned into embeddings. All of it can be used, but you don't want to use all of it. You want to use the good stuff. You want to find the patterns in the good stuff. I think that's going to be a huge, huge set of projects over the next 2 to 3 years as intelligent companies sit down and really think about how they're going to curate their data for some of these AI models. And I think that's where a Bill of Rights comes in very handy because it's good to have key principles that you look to when you hit the gray areas, when you ask yourself, is this okay? Well, let's look at our Bill of Rights and see. But what do you think about that, David?
I think you hit the nail on the head. I mean, I'm going to write an article pretty soon, and entitled "Why Your AI System is Stupid." And it's good. And when you come down to the postmortem on all this stuff, and I diagnose this stuff all the time, it comes to the bad data that's being consumed, and people aren't paying attention to the information that's under their control. There's bad data hygiene practices. The integrity is just not there. They're not getting parity within the information. Erroneous information is in there. I mean, GPT thinks I went to MIT. And that came out of some bad data that it consumed in the system. And I think that I didn't go to MIT, by the way. And I think that when we get to the essence of what generative AI needs, data hygiene, data consumption techniques, the ability to clean data, the ability to get it into the right state, the ability to find a single source of truth, the ability to get information with the performance vectors that we need to get at the information is way more important than setting up these AI systems. And most enterprises do not have solid foundational data. I mean, you and I speak at a lot of these conferences. I'll say anybody who has a single source of truth within their enterprise for a customer, raise their hand, and all heads go down. They all look at their shoes. And so unless you're able to have that sort of data integrity, able to find and get at the data, identify the data, who the ownership is, and all these sorts of things that we should have done 30 years ago, the AI system is not going to have value. It's going to actually do more harm than good. So I think you hit the nail on the head. Data is foundational, all this. You got to fix your data first. We can't start bolting AI systems on top of bad data. We're just going to get bad answers.
Yeah. And we've heard some stories. I'll throw this one over to Doug. We've already heard stories about things gone wrong with ChatGPT. I mean, I published a magazine way back in 1992 called Ecological Times, and some friends of mine and I learned a lot about the printing business and that we could do this ourselves. So we did. And then we stumbled into a crazy opportunity. We interviewed Jacques Cousteau on the phone. It was awesome. It was very cute. He was a very cute little man. When I first rang, the phone rings and he answers the phone and he says, "Hello?" I was like, "Captain Cousteau." "Ah, yes." I'm like, "This is Eric Kavanaugh, Ecological Times." He goes, "Ah, yes, I'm on the other line to France. Can you call back in the 5 minutes?" I was like, "Yes, I'll call you back." It was cute. But anyway, I bring that up because thinking about where we're headed with all this stuff and thinking about knowledge management and being able to use this kind of stuff, well, guess what, man? It's going to be a very interesting wild ride if we don't do these things properly. And when I think about knowledge graphs as a foundation for this next generation of technologies, I think that's pretty compelling. So that where I was kind of going with all this is this concept of anchors of truth or moorings, basically. And I see that a knowledge graph could be very powerful as a grounding force, as ground truth. And my buddy Alex Husky, who's from ExxonMobil, he had a great comment. He said, well, we shouldn't let these LLMs just pattern recognize their way to the truth because that's not the truth. I mean, there has to be some ground truth. So what do you feed these? That's your bettings, of course. What do you feed them to hold them down? And to me, it feels like a knowledge graph is a very natural way to start that process. But what do you think, Doug?
I mean, obviously, I'm biased based where I'm at, but I think, and I came, as you know, from the master data management world, where David, we were doing single source of truth everywhere. I mean, I'm kidding. I mean, it was a problem everywhere. I think that a knowledge graph, and again, as I've made the transition from MDM over to graph technology, it has just even made more sense. Is that solid foundation that we always talk about? So, to me, having that ability to have that massive, interconnected database that allows you to tie all the different processes and systems, not only have to tie them together because that sounds like again we're reaching the nirvana, but have that ability to have that place where you can start to derive a fashion of the single version of the truth. Knowledge graphs are excel at that, not just from the ability to handle multiple sources of data in different kinds of formats, and to your point, great at unstructured data, but also their ability to scale. I mean, they scale extremely well by comparison to some of the other database formats that are out there. The other thing that I think is important on the foundational side is goes because some of the other topics you're talking about is provenance and lineage. I mean, we've got all this great data, but now we've got David going to MIT. I think ChatGPT probably said I should go to MIT, but without having good data lineage, be able to trace that back. What was the ancestry of this data? Where did it come from? How did this MIT and David get associated?
Right.
If you're not
Right.
able to track that back, then it's just random data. So in graph technology allows for that, that storage of and the inferences of in order to drive more data insights, but still a pathway to say, what was the provider of this? Was it the human model? Was the data model, et cetera?
Right.
Well, behind that's where I think that you've got that enhanced understanding that gets created from a graph technology base.
Yeah, and I just remembered why I brought up that article. So I asked Bard, Just yesterday, I was like, "Who wrote this article for Ecological Times?" And it said, "Oh, yes, I know who wrote that. It was like John Jones or something like that." And I was like, "No, it was me." I said I was actually me, and it came back and said, "Oh, I'm sorry. I must have misunderstood that, or I made a mistake. You're right. You and this other guy wrote the article." I'm like, "All right, now you're just parroting back what I told you." So, but I think the deceptive side of this thing is that the prose is so good and it reads so well that it's very believable, right? So it's not lying to you, it's just doing what it does and generating information. So we do have to be careful about how we use those technologies going forward. And I think that's where these RAG models come in, right? Retrieval augmented generation, and I think that's going to be where the sizzle is for quite some time. I'll throw that over to Kate, as I'm guessing you've studied that at least a little bit. These RAG models are going to get very sophisticated in terms of how they generate answers and how they stay on task, basically. And there was a technology I saw that got bought by Click. In fact, Kyndi, Kyndi, they had a tool, a platform for using LLMs. It did something very clever where you would ask it, so you could feed it, let's say, a user manual for the new iPhone, and you would use it as the sort of, it'll automatically generate frequently asked questions, and it'll show you the answers it came up with. And then you can curate that and kind of fine tune it. But what's interesting is they not only will give you an answer, they'll then give you a drop down that would show you where it got the answer from. So it'll say, I pulled this answer from second paragraph on page 2 and third paragraph on page 9. And I'm like, that's fantastic. It's that citation, and that is now believable. It's at least citing its sources, right? So I think we're already on a good path to kind of solve some of these things. But Kate, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, absolutely. In fact, whenever I do use ChatGPT or something similar, I now ask and add sources, because then it
Yes.
actually makes sure that there is some sort of data lineage. I can go back and check, okay, this is where it came from. And I wanted to add another point. So earlier you mentioned the ability to correct your data, like in David's situation of not having gone to MIT, but ChatGPT seems to think you did. Being able to say, where did you get this information, going back, and then there's a higher chance that you might be able to edit something once you know where it sits. But yeah, I think without retrieval augmented generation, we are just getting random data. And especially when we look in healthcare, right? We need to be able to identify where did the data come from. So I know there's lots of great use cases for using AI in, let's say, MRI and scans and trying to prevent cancer and just analyzing x-rays. But having all of the data that supports it, like this scan specifically was from a woman who was between the age of 33 and 35, and the results came back positive, and then sort of keep drilling down further and further back when you need to, right? We don't want to be inundated with all that data, but once we have questions, we should be able to actually drill down and filter and learn more for where this is coming from.
Yeah, that's great stuff. And let's see, David, there's a great question that came in from an audience member, so I'll throw it over to you. And I love this question. An attendee asks, can you envision a system that self-heals data autonomously, perhaps able to track sources, etc.? It's a fantastic idea. Also, when it comes to LLMs being incorrect, could we have higher expectations than there should be? What do you think about those two questions, David?
I think it's an excellent question, and the reality is you can build self-healing systems into AI. It's continuous improvement. In other words, they're always reevaluating, re-looking at the information, and they have an adversarial relationship with another process to make sure the data is close to being truth. So you should be able to get accurate data, and it should refine accurate data over time by having those processes in place. But the reality is the data is still only going to be as good as the data that's consumed in the system. And so if you're consuming bad data, you don't have access to good data. It can't create good data typically out of bad data. And that becomes kind of a problem into itself. So the self-healing aspect of it is something that people are addressing right now. I think that, and for the business systems, that's going to be possible. I think for the big LLMs that we have out there now that we're using to write our papers and things like that, that's going to be a little bit more problematic to get in there, understand the data, and get that data out of there. It's not going to self-heal because it doesn't have a reference framework as to where the correct data is. And therefore, if it saw the incorrect data more than a few places and it's verifying itself internally within the adversarial networks that it uses, then it's never going to be corrected unless someone builds those capabilities in there. So that's what people are complaining about right now, is these big, massive LLMs that are producing bad information. We can certainly heal them as users of the system by updating the systems, but in essence, it's going to find consensus. And if the consensus is wrong, it's gathering bad data everywhere, which is the problem with bad data. It replicates itself. Then you're not going to be able to self-correct it. So it's possible, feasible within the business applications that reside within enterprises because we have more control of the information. With these big, massive LLMs that we're seeing starting to emerge out there, less so.
Yeah. Well, and I think that's why they're talking about these small language models or more refined models. Or guess what? There's a company I've done some work with out of they're based in California, but another gentleman is over in the UK, and they are focused on what they call dark data. And I'll throw this over to you, Doug, because they're doing something very similar to what you guys are doing, and that they've built out industry specific ontologies. And so using that ontology as a framework through which to explore your unstructured data can be very helpful in classifying what you've got out there. Because I think organizations to leverage all this contextual data, which is going to be very important for leveraging AI, for getting good AI systems, you need to understand the context that's in the unstructured data largely. It's also in our heads. And that's the challenge, right? Is that we look at structured data and in our head is all the context to understand what it means, or at least a lot of the context. Well, systems can't, tap into our brain, at least not yet. I know Elon Musk is working on that with his little chip, which I think is a bit creepy. But right now, it's either in our heads or it's got to be in that unstructured data somewhere. That's where these ontologies are very powerful because it's almost like a rudder that keeps you going in the proper direction. But what do you think, Doug?
You said the magic word context, and that to me is what is so important to driving use of this data. I mean, to David's point, yeah, there's bad data out there, but sometimes you have to ask the question: is the data bad, or do we not have the right semantics applied to the data to create understanding? There is bad data. I mean, there's clearly, but David and MIT weren't bad data points; they were just connected poorly. So by themselves, David's not bad, but MIT is not bad. The context that was applied to that is a big part of the problem. So when I look at how we bring these ontologies together in order to support that, and we've got there's free ontologies out there. There's ones that we've created for our own systems. There's medical ontologies, financial ontologies. It's as I've said so many times, the best data by itself is just data. It's just boring chunks of stuff. It's when you apply the information to it, ontologies and you got a classification now becomes intelligence and wisdom. You actually get to do something with it. I think sometimes we almost put too much expectations on data itself, and we get mistaken between data and information and wisdom. That's where I think we get hung up. And if I go back to my having fun with the Bill of Rights thing, is that data should have the right to assemble. How do you bring data together with other pieces of data, structured, unstructured, bring data together with all ontologies in order to make that data useful? Otherwise, I just feel bad with these little pieces of data running around saying, hey, I've got some use to you.
That's pretty funny. The right to peaceably assemble, right? That's what we
Peacefully.
want to seek redress of grievances from the people who created the bad data in the first place, the people who created the bad schema in the first place. All those folks who created stuff years ago. That's what we need to worry about. Well, that's good stuff, folks. And anyway, don't touch that dial. We'll be right back. You're listening to DM Radio. All right, folks, back here on DM Radio talking about a data bill of rights with Doug Kimball of Ontotext, David Linthicum, author, analyst, speaker, keynote speaker, and Kate Strachnyi of DATAcated. And Kate, maybe I'll throw this over to you. I saw an interesting article the other day about news gathering. And I'm a big media guy. I'm into news and gathering facts and understanding. And they were talking about, speaking of self-organizing data, which I think is a very interesting concept. If you were to build algorithms to just sit around and wait for certain conditions to occur and then have this sort of self-aggregating data that forms news, that's kind of interesting. I mean, I look at, again, in terms of data being accessible and having equality, having equity, if you will, for accessibility of data, that's a big deal because right now there are a handful of big companies that have access to tremendous amounts of data. They can do all kinds of things, train algorithms, do all this kind of stuff that benefit them, and they say it benefits us in terms of us getting better ads. Like, give me a break. Has that ever really happened? Has everyone like, oh, I'm so glad I got this ad and not some other ad? I don't think so. I don't think that's a real value add. I'm just going to be honest here. I mean, giving me a better price on something or knowing when I want something, oh, maybe, I guess so. But these are interesting questions to ask, and I think that equity one is kind of interesting. I, I I once wrote about this. I wrote on the topic of alternative data that because these credit card companies are selling massive amounts of transactional data, to your point of what you bought, where, at what time, all this stuff is out there. And of course, insurance companies can buy it and they say, oh, this guy buys too much beer. We shouldn't insure his health. Or this person buys too many ice cream cones. We shouldn't insure their health. I mean, that starts to get kind of creepy. And my suggestion was, there should be some regulation that says if a company is going to sell my data to some third party, like an investment bank, for example, they should also provide an anonymized version for what I call a consumer facing data lake, where you could see what's really going on out there in the world. Because transactional data is very important to understand. You can track trends, you can understand who's purchasing what objects and for what price. That could get very interesting. What do you think about all that, Kate?
I think that would be very interesting. And I'm personally, I would be fascinated to actually go through all of that data. I think now we do get a very small glimpse. For example, if you get an energy bill and it says, people in your neighborhood have used this much more than you, or you're using 20% less than your neighborhood. That's sort of the anonymized, it's very anonymized data that gives you a glimpse into, okay, maybe I should cut back. Or, wow, I've been really good this month. Gives you that sort of guidelines, right? And I think that's very interesting. I don't know if we'll get there because those companies don't want to share that data. They want to monetize that data. They want to use it. By the way, I want to make sure I don't forget. We're not doing a very good job today at making sure that the future time David asks, if you went to MIT, we referenced it so much. We're literally making this even worse next.
That
Because if
is a
there's going to
good
be a
point.
transcript of this, the number of times you said David Linthicum and MIT is just at least five
I'm
times.
okay with that bad data. I mean, that's much better than the college I actually went to. So it's an upgrade. So I'm
That's
cool.
funny. I'm
But
cool with
yes,
it.
back to the point here, I really don't know if we're going to get there anytime soon because those companies are going to try to hoard that data as much as possible because there's so many ways they can monetize it, right?
Mhm.
In addition to seeing the anonymized data across everybody, I'd love to see my own data.
Wow.
I don't have my healthcare data. I don't have access to any of that. I remember back when I was a teenager switching a dentist. I went to one dentist and we had no insurance, so I had to go to another one. He was family, but very expensive. But anyways, I asked for my records and I just realized I'm like, oh, I have to actually ask for it and hope they give me the right records and make sure that I get it in there. And he actually didn't give it to me. He's like, no, we'll transfer it over to the next dentist. Tell me who I'm sending this to,
Right.
which that shouldn't be the case. It's my freaking data, right?
Right.
It gets
Right.
very frustrating.
That was a great Seinfeld episode, right? With
Oh my God,
the
yes.
record, right? Remember, it's like the one doctor
With
at the end, he
Elaine, I
goes,
remember that.
"Right, Elaine," and the doctor's like, "Oh, I'll just go ahead and erase that." Like, and she goes, "It was written in pen." He's like, "What?"
Yes, that was good.
But there is that tendency. It's odd that because I know exactly what you're talking about. You try to get your own data, like, oh no, we're going to give it to this. Like, why not? It's my data. It's the data about me.
Yeah.
I know in GDPR, maybe David, I'll throw this one to you. In GDPR, I think they do say you can tell a company, I want to know all the data you have about me, and they're supposed to send you that data. Have you heard any stories? Do people actually do that, and what it actually looks like?
Yeah, this goes to my accountability and consent and control thing that's missing, certainly with the way we manage data, here in the United States. And I think European laws and regulations are getting very, data paranoid about this, but I think to the right outcome, because they are realizing that people we're holding personal information about people, financial data, healthcare data, things like that. They may not even understand that they're holding it. And if people are asking for the information, it should be provided. You try doing that here, you can certainly sue somebody for that. But as far as having laws and regulations and cops, data cops you can call to have them, raid the organization to get your data, that's non-existent. And we don't even consider that a possibility. So we just consume that our data is going to be out there. It's going to be stored by somebody. If we ask for it, they may or may not give it to us. Most of the time, it's not going to give it to us. They use it against us. In many instances. And so we have this kind of love-hate relationship with our personal information that's stored by all these entities out there that are storing the information. And we have another dimension of this as people are leveraging these generative AI systems. I can even backfill the information. I can take anonymized data from a healthcare database and I can turn a generative AI system loose on it and actually have it fill it in with the people who the data belong to. So it'll backtrack and backfill the information. That's another area of concern. So in other words, even if we're providing them with non-PII information, the AI systems can actually make PII information out of it. And so people don't understand that. That's a dimension or the ability to build missing pieces into these systems that I've been aware of for a long period of time. It's very scary when you do these recommendation engines where it could look at behavior, then figure out who they're dealing with to recommend certain products and services. So we have all this new technology that's coming ahead, and we don't have an understanding of how our data is going to be leveraged. And the concern is that it's going to move out of our control, and it's going to be very difficult to get back into control. And in some ways, I think the genie's out of the bottle. We're not going to be able to get it back in the bottle.
Yeah, no, I think you're right. I mean, I think that is the what I call it, the chat is out of the bag, basically, is what I saw. There's just not a lot you're going to do about that. But come up with policies, I think, is the key, right? Come up with policies that make sense. But accountability, that's that. I mean, I've written down some of these principles. Accountability is huge. And one of our attendees is asking, what do you think happened over at Google with this misstep? And maybe Doug, I'll throw this one over to you. It does seem to me that these engines are so powerful that we need a new depth of transparency into what they do and how they operate. I mean, even if you get at least some sort of schematic on how the engine is pulling together what it does, obviously you got lots of variables in there. And I was talking to Ray Wang about this, and he told me, look, don't think so much static architecture, think flow, think information flowing and being fused together in terms of how these things actually work. But I feel like, and to ask Congress to do anything is a bit of a fool's errand, I think. But maybe the industries should self-regulate to some extent, and I think we have got to get transparency at least into the basic working mechanisms that are driving these engines. Because you look at what Gemini did with, what was it, black Nazis and female popes and all this kind of stuff. It's like, all right, guys, we understand you want to be diverse, but there's a certain point at which some accuracy would be desired. But what do you think about transparency and accountability for these engines, Doug?
Yeah, I think it's critical. But if I got to touch one thing, and just going back to you before we went to the commercial break, and now this vision of data unrest, by the way, because we have the right to assemble. Now we've got bad data being unruly. The right for the data unrest is happening. Sorry, it was stuck in my head from an amusement standpoint.
That's all
Um,
right.
Again, it goes back to what I had talked about from a lineage standpoint and a context standpoint too, from the data transparency piece, is that we have as individuals, and we should have the right to not be overlooked in our process of having data being stored and being accessible and being shared. But that data should have the same right. In other words, to get the most value out of the data, it should be seen, it should be understood, it should be being used. But from a transparency standpoint, yeah, I think you have to have that acknowledgement that data itself and its accessibility will likely have very few boundaries. We have to be the ones that help to set that, and whether it's Congress or whatever it's going to be. Yeah, but at the same time, we argue for transparency, but we also want easy access and the right for the information. So how do we balance those things out? Because I don't want to give this away, but I want you to answer my questions at the same time.
Hmm.
But yeah, I think ultimately it comes down to we as users have to have the right of that transparency. To Kate's example, dentist, I'm asking for my data. What is my data doing, being used for? How is it being shared? How can I get more access to do something with that? And that's going back to the graph perspective, having those ability to understand and identify all those relationships between that data, that helps with that developing transparency, because now again you can track it back, you can understand where things go, you can have that lineage to explain things to you, because you're making these linkings, these combinations. So
Yeah.
yeah.
That's very interesting stuff. Well, folks, podcast bonus segment is coming up next. If you want to be in the show, send me an email, info@dmradio.biz. The time flies on these shows. We'll be right back. You're listening to DM Radio. All right, folks, time for the podcast bonus segment here on a lively show about the Data Bill of Rights, talking to David Linthicum, Kate Strachnyi, and, of course, Doug Kimball. And we wanted to talk about the right to manage data and also data ownership. Who owns the data? Who's responsible for the data? And then how do you hand that off? And, I'm reminded of some of the cooler developments in the recent years of, for example, appending data in a database as opposed to deleting data in a database. Because if you append, then you can always roll back. And I'm the kind of person I've moved around a lot. I've even moved to the same location multiple times, which gives data quality vendors fits, I'm sure. It's like, wait, no, he moved from there. No, I moved back there. Same place. Yeah, same place. I sure did. Yes. Several times I've done that. It freaks your mind, I can tell you that. But in this appending world, that's good stuff because now I can append if you want to be forgotten, but I can bring you back if you want to, right? So you can kind of roll it back. If you just overwrite data, well, that data is gone now. But in terms of the right to manage too, you can all have your different views of the data. Now, obviously, things can get pretty complex, but I remember learning about this with hierarchy management with a company called Raza. They were working for, I think it was Chase Bank back in the day, and helping them do different roll-ups so different people could see different views of the same data, right? I mean, there are materialized views, there are different ways to do that. But the right to manage data, especially data that affects you, that I think is kind of interesting to have some policy where if there's data about me that's wrong, I should have a right as the owner of that data to change that data. Now, this gets into the how side of the equation, which is not an easy thing to solve, right? How do you actually fix that? Is there some project you have to roll out to do that? It's not the easiest thing to do, but Doug, I'll throw it over to you to comment on first. I think people should have the right to manage their data as long as they do so in a transparent fashion. And one great thing about the cloud is that it captures all this metadata by design. So you know who logged in, what they did, all that stuff is captured in log files. So that's your audit trail. On-prem, it's a little bit different, but I think you do need to have the right to manage your data. What do you think, Doug?
I'll give you a real life example. I've actually had 3 names in my life. I was born one name, middle name change, last name change. I'm midway through my time in the military. I actually changed my last name officially back to my family name. So try going back to the military, asking for your DD-214 form with the right name on it. I don't have the ability to go into the military system. There's a shock for you, and update the records that I am Doug Kimball through my entire 10-year history in the military. I can't manage that data. So it continues to propagate my old name sometimes, and my my new name for the last, I think it's absolutely important because if going back to Kate's example about confusing David with a new, the other school he didn't go to, that continues to be added to. We get this bloat of data. So if I can't manage my data and it's wrong in there somewhere, it's just going to get worse. So I think it's critical that users should have some way of managing any data about them that may be right or wrong, as long as they're using it for the right need. And that's where it becomes kind of tricky.
Well, and Kate, I'll throw this one over to you because I know that you also get into process and workflow and, really important stuff like how is this going to get done exactly and how are we going to make sure that it was done, checking on things, for example. You can have staging areas for data. You can give people on the front lines the capacity to at least suggest changes that at some point will be updated by the system. And guess what? Here's a great use case for machine learning, for AI.
Yeah.
You fill that into the machine. It waits in a staging area until a certain point in time, and then goes zoop and kind of bangs it all out. Machine learning and AI is going to be great for what Dave was talking about, backfilling stuff. But what are your thoughts about all that, Kate?
Yeah, I think first of all, I want to ask, sometimes we don't even know that there is wrong data. And, if David never asked ChatGPT to write a bio about himself, he would have never known that there is even that data that talks about him and that school he went to. By the way, Doug, I changed my name 5 times. I've had middle names, last names, everything's been changing. My first and last name were not my given name. But Eric, to your question, we do have some capability in some cases. So as an example, Google has something called a knowledge page, which I created for myself probably 2 or 3 years ago. It took several months for them to approve it, but you have to upload all your documents and you basically own a space on Google. So if you Google me right now, it will have the right picture of me that I want to be seen. It would have the right name. It would have all the information I want and none of the information I don't. So I actually do have some control. It basically is kind of like the staging area that you were just talking about, where you can go in and peek and see, okay, this is sort of what I had in mind. They'll build one for you, but then you can have the ability to go in and say it's wrong or it's right. But I think that's just one tiny example. my fear is that we just don't even know if our data is accurate until something happens. And usually it's
Right.
not something good. It's not like you win the lottery out of nowhere. Like, oh, David, you won the lottery. And you're like, well, I never played, but sure. Yeah, no, it's usually like a bill that comes in the mail or something, quite the opposite, right, of winning the lottery. But how do we actually see all that data that is collected about us? Because we don't even have access. So I think before even trying to control the data, we need to find some sort of way to view all the data that we have about us as consumers, or if you're in an organization, all the data that is actually available. And I think now with the tools that, technologies, and we had them for years, we can actually see some of that visually, but I think we're still not quite there where we can see what's wrong before even trying to fix it.
Yeah, right. I'm thinking the last couple of minutes here, when I was at the CES conference, I interviewed a gentleman from MasterCard, and I'll throw this one over to David for commentary. They engaged in what is, I think, a very clever campaign where they partner with a number of content providers. We're thinking magazines, business magazines. And what they did is they came up with an AI engine. It's an LLM, but it's been trained on all this information about how to set up a business, how to do marketing, all this basic stuff about small business management. And the idea is that it's a little AI assistant for a small business person. And I thought to myself, that is very clever. That is a way to use trusted information to put an engine underneath it that allows an interactive conversation for business people. That's really getting somewhere. I think that's a great use of AI and good quality, curated, trusted data. What do you think, David?
Yeah, I think it is. And I think we're going to see some killer applications of that where people are using it for innovative ways that are going to be more micro problems that they're solving versus these meta problems that we're trying to solve. And I think that's what AI is going to have the most value in making it happen. But to your point, it needs access to information to make these things valuable to people who are leveraging them. So as a business, I would like to have an LLM that would tell me how to manage my small business, but I'd also like to have it have the ability to augment its knowledge with some of my sales data and my demographics data and come back and tell me specifically what I should be doing, how I should be messaging myself on the web, how I should be leverage different web platforms, how much money should I spend on advertising, where should I advertise, all those sorts of things. So we're getting into these dimensional breakthroughs, I think, in leveraging this technology for the good. And that's going to be a mix of public information that we train train our LLMs with, but also we're going to have to give up some private information to get some value out of this. And so that comes back to what we were talking about today. How can we assured if we're giving up some private information about our
Right.
business, about ourselves, to come back?
Great stuff. Well, folks, look these people up online. Kate Strachnyi from DATAcated, just like it sounds. Doug Kimball from Ontotext, and of course, David Linthicum, author, analyst. And two of the three folks on here will be speaking at the conference, I do believe, at the Data Universe conference. Hop online, look up Data Universe, April 10th and 11th in New York City. Hope to see you there, folks. Send me an email if you want to be in the show, info@dmradio.biz. You have been listening to DM Radio.